welcome back to another episode with Fight Night Picks. As always, we're brought to you by SimBody. Vertiball is now SimBody. If you head on over to their website, simbody.com, you're going to get all the great products that you know and love, including the SimBody Vertiroller and the Vertiball that you have seen most likely here in studio. Look at that. Place it, lock it, attach it, Vertiball, all sorts of great stuff over there if you want to roll out those old tired muscles and you don't want to go with that old lacrosse ball. They're also coming out with that very new product that you can see right in front of you. And if I head on over to my cart, look at that. I've already got a Vertiball over there. Little bit of a deal right there. And if you hit the try for 60 days risk-free, use the promo code FNP, you're going to get 20% off your order with that code FNP at simbody.com. You're really, really helping out another local company here in New Brunswick, Canada. Can't wait for it. The new name, SimBody at simbody.com. And as we always say, let's get into it.
A last look at the big card. Be sure to head into the chat and have your say. Let's get into it and join in Fight Night Picks Kicks.
And welcome back with Fight Night Picks, getting set for UFC 276. Donald E. Guys hitting up a giant super chat to start off the show, so thank you so much. And we'll answer that question once we get through the intro. But Matt, UFC 276, kicks 2 hours before the prelim, the Fight Night Picks sidekick. During the main card, you can hang out right here. Bobby Townsend's trying to drop some facts over there, so that's pretty interesting stuff. Donnie Dimes, Ignorant MMA, Craig Hart, Cuppy, Charles, Prince Vegeta's son, Voodoo saying such a good card. Voodoo, yeah, exactly, going to be there for that sidekick. But I'm looking forward to that because this is probably the biggest card that we've had so far this year, and it's hard to predict if we'll have better ones as the year goes on. But when you get an international fight week like this, you had on Thursday night the Hall of Fame, which was really condensed. There were so many great entrants there. But when we look at this card, I mean, stacked top to bottom, minus maybe the first two fights on the card. But other than that, it's fire.
This card is as deep as any that we've had, really, of all time, if we're being completely honest. Like, Uriah Hall and Andrea Muniz is one of the first fights on this card. It's kind of ridiculous. Just, it tells you how talented this whole card is. Stacked top to bottom. And the great thing is, it feels like a bit of a middleweight showcase card. You have, of course, the fight for the number one contendership in Strickland versus Alex Pereira. A fight that so many people are excited about because you have the guy who is so much more experienced in Strickland going up against one of the greatest strikers of all time in Alex Pereira. So I know a lot of people are excited for that fight. And we haven't even mentioned the two title fights at the top of the card. You have the trilogy between Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski. I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later. Interesting to see how fired up Max Holloway's been fight week. Normally very reserved, very calm. And then when the fight starts, then he kind of goes into that mode. Very curious to see if there's almost been like a cognizant reaction in his camp to be like, hey, let's try to dial it up a little bit more. Let's be a little bit more emotional for this. Because if Max can normally go from being a regular guy to one of the greatest fighters ever, now he's already angry. He might even be able to put some more spice onto that. I'm very excited for this co-main event.
Sean McMinn hitting up that super chat. Donald E. Guys, to answer the question, I think I'd go with Du Plessis. I like the volume. The Turner-Riddell fight's kind of a catch-22. I think one guy is going to finish the other. It's just hard to tell who.
The thing about Turner-Riddell is that could be like a 29-28 either way, crazy bloodbath of a fight. Whereas Du Plessis versus Tavares, okay, Tavares could look really good, get a decision win, but he also is quite hittable against one of the harder punchers on his way up through the division. So I do like Du Plessis slightly more, but that's really just because the Turner and Riddell fight is so hard to predict.
Should be a wild one, Matt. We'll throw it on over to the fight of the night screen. And listen, Brad Riddell, Jalin Turner, as we just said, this is a wild fight. Now, originally at the start of the week, seemed like it was going to be on the pay-per-view portion, but they've given this to us as the curtain jerker. This is the headliner for the prelims, Matt. I've drank a lot of water to get ready for the show. But again, this is one of those wild fights. When you look at it for Jalin Turner, tidy little win streak. I know Jamie Mullarkey's probably sitting back because he's a part of that team with Alexander Volkanovski. He's probably already over in Vegas, but he's got to be watching that one with bated breath considering he's got his fight with Michael Johnson next weekend. But for Brad Riddell, coming off that loss to Fiziev, who's in the co-main event of next weekend, pretty crazy. And I really do love this fight because both these guys are finishers to the nth degree.
And styles make fights. And I know we sometimes say that with title fights or fights that people are crazy excited for, but even fights where guys are scratching and clawing to get their way into the rankings can be those styles make fights type of fights. And I don't know how this fight can be boring, if I'm being completely honest. Both guys are a good enough level of grappler to where even if it is contested on the mat, and I don't expect it to be, I think it would still be a pretty fun fight. And on the feet, both these guys throw with crazy power behind their shots. You look at Brad Riddell, and probably think, yeah, that guy has power punches. But Jalin Turner has this really smooth, slick way of moving on the feet. That's a real joy to watch. So I think this will be an incredible fight.
Ian Campbell, I slept through the fireworks, and then it was a nasty storm, and we have severe thunderstorm warning going on right now in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. So if it starts to thunder and the power goes out, we'll figure out an alternative. But again, another fight of the night. Pedro Munhoz and Sugar Sean O'Malley. Matt, Momoji Sports 21 with a giant super chat as well. Can't thank and appreciate you guys enough. The new IG is gaining ground, so go follow Momoji Sports 21, who's absolutely killing it over on Instagram right now. Big month of June, so thank you to Momoji Sports 21, who's been here like on the ground floor with Fight Night Picks in the comments section. So thank you so much for that super chat. But Matt, in this fight, obviously, Pedro Munhoz, walking fight of the night. Also performance bonus as well for Sean O'Malley. Only one of his fights since Dana White's Contender Series hasn't been a bonus winner for him. But he's looked amazing in all of those fights. Last time out against Raulian Paiva, he's still doing the basketball fadeaway celebration at the end. I love this fight. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Win, lose, or draw for both these guys. They're in some bangers for fights.
This is like when you see what a 2011 version of an MMA fighter looks like versus what a 2021 version of an MMA fighter. Because Sean Strickland, Sean O'Malley, you look at him, he's got the colorful hair, he's covered in tattoos, he has a colorful personality too, whereas Pedro Munhoz just kind of like does his job, shows up, he does his talking in the ring per se, but he still has a decent level of fans behind him for a guy who doesn't have to go out there and really get a headline or be really wild in these press conferences. This fight is so interesting because their fighting styles are completely different. You have a guy who has a very well-rounded game in Pedro Munhoz, so good at jiu-jitsu, but he's really been able to grow with his striking as his career's progressed, whereas Sean O'Malley's almost in the opposite form. Like, he is a good grappler. We hear about his grappling. We'll see it here and there in his fights, but we all know how talented of a striker he is. And if he is able to beat a guy like Pedro Munhoz, who's been there and done that with some of the best fighters in this division, the sky really could be the limit for Sean O'Malley.
And for Munhoz, you consider his last number of fights. I mean, the only one that wasn't all that close, maybe the Jose Aldo fight. Like, it really is a lot of fun when you go through it. He was able to get the knockdown against Dominic Cruz. He's had some bangers in his own right. And if this is somebody's first time out there joining in with Question Mark Kicks, we thank you. If you've been along for the entire ride, we thank you as well. Toss a like and listen, we'll get the ball rolling. And I say for the new folks out there, with Question Mark Kicks, we start at the bottom of the card. We whip our way up through the top. If you missed anything, we'll run back through it once more. And I saw a comment up there from Joshua Chipman about the co-main event, Volkanovski, Holloway, based on the way the judges are scoring it. Volkanovski hasn't really been going for too many takedowns, or at least in the first two fights against Max Holloway, the takedown wasn't the biggest part of his offense. So an interesting one to note there. But Matt, we'll kick this card off the right way. We've got Jessica Rose Clark taking on Julija Stoliarenko. We're both split on the pick at the start of the week. We'll have a look at the odds for this one because Clark did open as the favorite. She is still the favorite in this matchup. Opened, I should say, I was completely wrong. Open plus 175, but the line dipped very quickly. Minus 160 is Jessica Rose Clark. Stoliarenko open plus jumpins. Minus 205. Plus 134 right now. But when we do look at this fight, Matt, it is a little bit of a clash of styles. Stoliarenko, a little bit of a wild card when it comes to her striking. She has gained a little bit. I'd say her best striking performance, probably her fight against Lisa Verzosa over with Invicta when she won the bantamweight strap. For Jessica Rose Clark, consistent boxing, not a lot of leg kicks, and can get heavy on the wrestling. And if she does have a wrestling advantage over somebody, she'll go back to that well. You saw that in her last two wins, especially the one that she had over Sarah Alpar. And every time Sarah Alpar got back up, she's like Chumbawamba. Well, she knocked her back down again. So a big-time fight when it comes to this one. Stoliarenko has lost multiple fights in a row, but she's been competitive in a few of them. So, Matt, I do like this fight. It is a weird one, though, because these are unranked women's bantamweights. There's 21 women's bantamweights. 16 of them are ranked, including the champ. So these are 2 of the 5 on their, way in, maybe, but probably not.
Okay, so how I always predict fights is, are you the one leading the dance, or are you just the one following along with the script? That's really how I predicted this fight. For Jessica Rose Clark, I think she's going to be the one who dictates the range, dictates the pace, and dictates where this fight take place, whether it is on the mat or on the feet. I don't think she's some great striker. I don't think she's some great grappler. But like you said, if she does have a wrestling advantage, it's something that she will go back to over and over and over again. The thing I don't love in Jessica Rose Clark, though, is her inactivity from that top position. A lot of fighters will work really hard to get the takedown, and then it's like, okay, now that I have the takedown, I really have to make my opponent pay for it because I wasted all of this energy to get on top. I don't want it to be for nothing. I don't want to just get 30 seconds of control time. Jessica Rose Clark can just be happy with some of that control time in some situations. I always go back to the Paige Van Zandt fight, a fight that she won, but let's be honest, was not the most impressive victory by any means, just because not all wins are created equal and not all losses are created equal. I think we do a good job on this channel of setting that stage. And for Jessica Rose Clark, yes, she got the dub, but you don't really leave that fight thinking, wow, she has the highest ceiling in the world. For Stoliarenko, I think it'll be interesting to see what she can offer off her back, because we all know how good of a grappler she is. But again, that's what I'm going back to. If she doesn't get the finish, it's going to be a lot of her reacting to what Jessica Rose Clark is bringing to her. And maybe she is able to get a finish in the second, maybe later in the third round when Jessica Rose Clark is a little bit more tired. But I think until a finish does come, and I don't really plan on there being a finish in this fight, I do expect Jessica Rose Clark to just be the more physical fighter in this matchup. And I think that'll be enough to just start edging out rounds.
Yeah, I don't like Jessica Rose Clark in any of her fights anymore. I mean, you look at it, the win that she had over Jocelyn Edwards, that was a good one. Jocelyn Edwards with her wrestling, it's almost non-existent. When you look at her other one over Sarah Alpar has had a rough road in the UFC, and I know she was an Invicta champ. She had actually beaten Jocelyn Edwards to win that crown, but when I do look at this fight, I had to cough. Yulia Stoliarenko, you do look at that losing streak. You look at the success that she had against Alexis Davis off her back, but Alexis Davis has arms made of rubber. And when I do look at this one,
Alexis Davis is older than our mom.
Jessica Rose Clark really does struggle. Once she does get on top, she has a hard time trying to figure things out. For Stoliarenko, 8 of her 9 wins are by armbar, which is a rudimentary women's MMA finish ability. And none of those have been inside of the UFC. But when you do look at the raw skills that she has possessed inside of the cage, I'm not saying she's like poor old Alain Badeau last week where, hey, I mean, he knocked down Josh Parisian and he was on a wild losing streak. But I do like the underdog in Stoliarenko. I think she has more methods to finish this fight. So I'll go with Stoliarenko. But again, you can make a case for either fighter, Matt. It's one of those ones where we're the lowest of level women's bantamweights here.
Yeah, I'm talking about who's leading the dance, not like whose boxing's better, so that's never a great sign. But again, this is one of those loser goes home Jeff Hardy, CM Punk on a Friday Night SmackDown type of fights.
It's a tough one. All right, we'll move into the next one, Matt. Jessica Eye.
Hair looks bad.
Is 5-9 with a no contest in the UFC, but we're still here for Maycee Barber. 2-fight win streak, first fight in the win streak. I mean, everybody, us, you, my 2 dogs, they think that Miranda Maverick won that fight, but for Maycee Barber, her last time out against Montana De La Rosa, she did look good, and she has made some gains in her game since she's gone over to Team Alpha Male. Now, in that De La Rosa fight, a lot of it up in the clinch, Barber able to get out of some of those bad positions, and that's a good spot for both of those women in that one. But when I look at this fight, you talk about who's able to dictate the range. For Jessica Eye, that's got to be the number one priority for her with her boxing, to figure out the range, to try and keep poor Maycee Barber off her. So Matt, the fans over in the comments section, Lord Nikon, Barber is the biggest lock on the card, IMO. We don't use that word here. Craig Hart, Barber gonna body her. We don't really say that here. And Frosty saying, happy belated Canada Day. Matt, when it comes down to this fight, obviously I know who we picked at the start of the week. It's kind of not the sexiest pick because of where Jessica Eye is so far in these rankings. But if you look at the fights that have fallen out for Jessica Eye recently, I look no further than Manon Fiorot as to where they kind of rank old Jessica Eye in this division.
I'm going to disagree with you, and this is why.
What they want to happen.
Exactly. It's like when Ricardo Lamas was the 3rd-ranked featherweight for years and years and years. And it was like, okay, he beat Diego Sanchez in Mexico City, and Diego Sanchez isn't even a featherweight. But when was the last time he had a great win? I know a lot of people are going to say, hey, Ricardo Lamas beat Cub Swanson back in 2011. Yeah, and the UFC held on to that for years and years and years, and it always felt like, fight after fight, we're going to keep Lamas in the top of the rankings. And the second we get a bright prospect or a fun prospect, we're going to feed Ricardo Lamas to that fighter. Now, I don't necessarily think that's exactly where Jessica Eye is in her career, but I think it's very similar. And especially this fight with someone like Maycee Barber, who was built up a lot by the UFC. They don't want her to now just go on a big losing streak and kind of, go away into the distance and maybe become like an Invicta champ or even just a Bellator fighter. They want a return on their investment in Maycee Barber. You don't want to know a great way to get a return on an investment with a prospect? Make them fight Jessica Eye. And it's nothing against Jessica Eye. It's just she has not gained in her game at all since she first came over to the UFC. And I know people are going to say, oh, well, she started out in a losing streak, then she went on a winning streak, and now it hasn't looked as great ever since. Her skills never changed, though, throughout any of those streaks. That's the big thing. At 135, she was very undersized for that division, something she had talked about a lot. So she moves down to 125. didn't really fight the greatest level of competition, if we're being honest, on her way to the title shot. I know she has that win over Caitlin Chukagian, which is like one of the worst fights of all time, and if you ever have to watch it, I feel very, very bad for you. But other than that one razor-close decision win that she hasn't been all that impressive at this weight class. It really does feel like every Jessica Eye fight comes down to a coin flip. If it lands on heads, Jessica Eye might get the win. If it lands on tails, she'll probably get the loss. She just has fallen into that category of, hey, even if everything goes in your direction, you're still probably only winning by like a slight unanimous decision or even a split decision. And with Maycee Barber, I know it's been up and down, but she is one of the few fighters in this division who can cause real damage fight after fight, round after round. And I do think that if she's able to hurt Jessica Eye early in the fight, not saying knock her down or anything like that, but just start putting punches together, I think she can have a lot of success as this fight goes on, because they're going to have success in the same range.
Super chat over there. And listen, Mr. 1985 saying that we don't look like we know anything about fighting of any kind, but the question is, O'Malley good against the takedown, and will Pedro take him down? Good opportunity for Pedro Munhoz to finally test the grappling of Sean O'Malley. We haven't really seen it in the UFC. It's a giant talking point from the promotion this week. Pedro Munhoz, I mean, go watch his fight against Rob Font when he just cranked down on that neck and the referee, there were so many taps, but he held on to it a little bit. But when you do look at Pedro Munhoz, he does like to get happy with his hands and whip that leg kick out there, and I think he's going to kind of rely on his striking in this one.
Oh, when was the last time Pedro Munhoz shot for a takedown? Like, he's one of these guys who will pull guard. He'll invite the grappling, but he's not a great wrestler himself. He does like a high single leg takedown because the position he can pull guard off to and go into a heel hook. But other than that, he's not someone who's just going to go chain wrestle. Like, hey, I've got O'Malley against the cage. Let's go from single leg to double leg and back and forth. So I think he can have success if he gets the fight to the ground. I just don't know if he can wrestle the fight to the ground. He might either have to leg kick O'Malley there or drop him with a big shot to get the fight down.
84% of the fans at Fight Night Picks on Instagram in the story, they have Maycee Barber to get the win in this one. And if we have a look at the odds for the fight, somebody said Pedro's a black belt though. So Shogun Hua, and you don't see him shooting many takedowns. Maycee Barber minus 308 favorite, and for Jessica Eye plus 247. Both of us in this one going with Maycee Barber to get the win. Matt, 479 tuning in right now. We got to get those likes up there. They're not over 100 yet. We got to get moving and shaking.
I know you said Shogun, and we'll talk more about this fight later. Pedro Munhoz is so much better in jiu-jitsu than Shogun. It's not even funny.
Well, yeah, but that's it. It's coming up to a big fight where you want to talk about big-time black belts in the jiu-jitsu. If you look at it for a tricky fighter in Andre Muniz, and I want to make sure, Matt, that I get this one right, because he is a third-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Otávio Duarte, an accredited Jiu-Jitsu specialist in his own right. You look at the bag of arms that Andre Muniz has at his house, and it's pretty creepy, but obviously it includes Jacare Souza's. For Uriah Hall, his last time out, he had a bit of a non-starter against Sean Strickland. I mean, his coach at a Fortis MMA, Saif Saud, was trying to get him into the fight, but for Saif Saud, he's got two fighters in his gym that sometimes they just don't show up. Kennedy Nzechukwu and Uriah Hall. And for Hall's last time out, it wasn't the best of fights. So, Matt, when it comes to this one, I've seen some people out there going with Uriah Hall in this matchup. Obviously, he has a striking advantage to Andre Muniz. We have seen Muniz get better lately. I mean, even in his fight against Eric Anders last time out. Like, he looked prepared and he had good movement of his hands. He didn't really move his head. But when it comes to this fight, Matt, again, we're going to get people on either side, and I'm eager to hear from them over in that comments section. But I think this is a fun fight in a middleweight division that needs new contenders.
And that's something that really stood out to me when I went back and watched the Eric Anders fight with Andre Muniz. It wasn't that his striking looked like it took a big upgrade, and I know people are probably sick and tired of me saying this, like Pat Sabatini's has recently, but there was a level of comfort that Andre Muniz showed in that fight, to where it wasn't just like he was stiff every time he was getting hit. He could move with the shots a little bit, and you're right. It's not like his head movement was amazing, but the fact that he's now moving with shots is a promising one, because it is showing that he's putting in the rounds in the gym, and really for a guy who's as good as he is on the ground, that's what you want to see. You just want to see incremental progression in his striking to where, okay, once we get into the top 10 and these guys can defend all your takedown attempts and they do start to test your striking, that's when you can show off, some of what you've been working on in the gym. But I do like the slow progression that we've seen out of Andre Muniz in his last few fights. And this is the thing about Uriah Hall that I find it's interesting, because he's good at fighting from behind, but not always. Like, if you go out there and put it on him for about a minute and a half, sometimes he can just immediately start throwing down and try to get it back. But sometimes he will wilt under the pressure. And I'm very curious against a guy like Andre Muniz, who normally his big levels of success come from the takedown, come from his grappling. Those are normally areas that once you get yourself into, it doesn't matter how much spinach you have if you're going to try to like Popeye out of it. Andre Muniz probably isn't going to let you back up to your feet, and that's what I worry about for Uriah Hall. It does almost take him a couple minutes to get into the fight, and against a guy like Andre Muniz, who the second he gets you down one time, even if they're clinching, Uriah Hall is in danger of being submitted. That's how good Andre Muniz is.
Like, if you just look at it singularly in Hall's last fight, he got taken down 4 times by Sean Strickland, but it was later in the fight. It was in the championship rounds because that was a 5-round fight. You look at it, if Antonio Carlos Jr. can get 3, then I'd say Andre Muniz can. But Antonio Carlos Jr. looks like a whole new man now over the PFL.
Is Andre Muniz Antonio Carlos Jr. we were promised? Like,
think
he's
so.
like if he lived up to his hype, kind of.
Yeah, and he is over in the PFL, but I do want to get to the comment section because there's a couple of really good ones over there, and I went too far up. Alex Gagnon saying, yes, they actually are live. We are. We're not just AIs in the computer, so there you go. Dan Goldstein with one of the comments of the week. You'll never see Chris Gutierrez and Pedro Munhoz in the same place because they're the same person. Prove me wrong. I mean, they do fight very similarly. That'd be a hell of a fight at 135. Chris Gutierrez needs that step up in competition. We have a look at Fight Night Picks for the votes on this one. 72% going with Andre Muniz to the 28% that have Uriah Hall. Muniz is the favorite in this matchup. It's a healthy number. Open minus 225, minus 338 right now. Uriah Hall plus 268. So I do have Andre Muniz in this one. Uriah Hall, we talk about it. He's not a front runner. He's a marathon runner. Like, you look at his fight against Bevon Lewis coming back. Some fights he goes fast and he gets going early, like the Gegard Mousasi, the first fight, I guess. But now I'm talking years ago about the former Bellator middleweight champ. So for me, I have Andre Muniz in this one, but I do think this is going to be a fun fight, and we're going to learn something about both these guys here.
Exactly, but I do understand where the odds are. Like, there are some fights where you have the more established fighter who is a big underdog against a hyped-up prospect. Even look back to last week with Shavkat versus Neil Magny. Yes, there was a more unproven guy against a much more proven fighter, but no one sat back and looked at those odds and disagreed with them. You know, like, I completely understand why Andre Muniz is like a minus 300 favorite, but there are definitely some huge red flags anytime you're fighting a guy like Uriah Hall.
Exactly, and if Muniz doesn't get the sub, he's been knocked out 4 times of his 4 losses. Our next fight, this is one that a lot of people are high on. I mean, you've got Brad Tavares taking on Dricus Du Plessis. Du Plessis, the first big-time test, I guess, in the UFC. I mean, listen, he got some tricky fighters on the way up. The Trevin Giles fight his last time out. The trouble is, for Du Plessis, hasn't had a lot of fights. I mean, he's had 4 bookings here recently that have all fallen out since about last summer. You look at it, I mean, Kelvin Gastelum was the last name that was on the bout agreement that he had signed. And for Du Plessis in his UFC debut, Marcus Perez was the guy, former LFA champ out of Brazil. You look at it for Brad Tavares, I mean, he's been in the UFC since the dawn of time, it seems, and he only fights about once a year. And I say all these things, but I look at this. Brad Tavares, tied second all-time for decision wins in the UFC behind Neil Magny, who didn't get it done the other week.
Poor guy.
And if you look at it, tied for second in this division's history in wins behind Michael Bisping was 16, Brad Tavares 14. But when it comes to this one, I mean, for Brad Tavares, nice boxing combinations, pretty rudimentary, but he's going to pump the jab out there, throw the overhand right. He does have quick hands. I just sound like a Western Canadian guy saying hand.
Has a lot less power than you would think, though, from a guy who's built like Brad Tavares.
Yeah, not a ton of knockdowns. And when you do look at it for him, a tidy little leg kick. He was one of those guys that implemented it 10, 12 years ago. So good there. We've got Chophead saying hello. Was it me you're looking for? I can see it in your eyes. Pablo saying, just checking in. What's up, boys? And Craig Hart, Magny looked like he took dumb pills. He just didn't look like he was in his element in that fight. And Shavkat's very, very good. But when it comes down to this one, Matt, I love the matchup. I mean, for Du Plessis, former double champ over at the UFC, welterweight and middleweight, former welterweight champ over the KSW, but that's an inflated welterweight. And for Brad Tavares, Ultimate Fighter 11, he didn't go to the finals, but he almost did. It should be a good fight, and it should be a good test, again, for both these guys in a middleweight division that I normally don't like, but it's good.
Okay.
It's good this week.
You like ran out of air and restarted a few times there. Here's the thing about Dricus Du Plessis. I hate so many things I've seen from him in the UFC up until this point, but I still love the promise that he has as a fighter. And I'm talking about him like he is a prospect, even though he really isn't in that mold anymore. He's not an MMA prospect, as much as I'm sure the UFC is going to call him a prospect in the UFC. But the thing is, he reminds me of Jar Jar Binks in the prequels when they're at war. He's like stumbling over stuff. He's doing everything wrong, but he's still doing like well. He's still getting the results that you want. It's just everybody hates him along the way. I don't think Du Plessis is quite as hated, but you get what I mean. Like in all of his fights, there's a one or two big moments, and you're just kind of concerned for him. You're like, what are you doing? You're moving back. You're kind of scared. Then you're putting your hands down and right back up. Like there is a lot of awkward movements out of Dricus Du Plessis, and I do think that is what it is at the end of the day. He is kind of an awkward fighter with his own striking, so it might not always look normal to the average fighter or even to the average viewer. But against someone like Brad Tavares, who is very traditional, I do think that sort of hitch in Dricus' game is going to give him a lot of success, because for Brad Tavares, he's someone who will stand in the pocket to try to figure out his own combinations as he's throwing them, and sometimes he is susceptible to getting hit by very big shots when he is standing there. I always go back to when Robert Whittaker did that jump in left hook and then hit him with another left hook as he went up. It was just a really nice strike, and I don't think Du Plessis is on the Robert Whittaker level, but still, Brad Tavares has been put down multiple times in the past, and if Edmund Shabazian can do it, I do believe Dricus Du Plessis probably can if he can land a clean shot.
Lord Nikon asking, what was the record number of people in the chat? I think we're almost there, Lord Nikon. So fill that chat up and toss those likes, and we'll break the algorithm on the show. Now, when it comes to the votes on this one, you guys can go to our Instagram. It's easy, at Fight Night Picks. And in the story, 81% going with the South African former champ in Du Plessis. We have a look at the odds for this fight. Du Plessis, slight favorite. I mean,
underdog at the start of the week, though.
He opened plus 110. That was just a couple weeks ago. But open plus 110. Minus 160 right now for Brad Tavares. Open minus 130. Plus 135 right now. Again, a lot of people talking about Brad Tavares. He has that level of experience in the UFC. He's beaten pure strikers before in the UFC. He even knocked out Krzysztof Jotko. That's a real thing that exists. But when I do go through the list of guys that Brad Tavares has knocked down in the UFC, and I'm not lying, I'm not making it up. Phil Baroni, Talis Leites, Krzysztof Jotko, and then his last time out, Omari Akhmedov. And the two last guys that Brad Tavares fought are no longer in the UFC. Omari Akhmedov and Shoeface Carlos Jr. Andrew F. Why is everybody going against Brad Riddell? I'd say because he got knocked out in his last fight.
I think there is a lot of recency bias in that fight, and I think a lot of people are playing like MMA math with Jamie Mullarkey, which is very strange to me, because styles make fights, first of all. And Turner was able to beat him very fast, which Jamie Mullarkey's been knocked out a lot of times in his career, so a lot of guys have been able to beat him very fast. Brad Riddell shows what happens if you don't beat him very fast, like Damon Jackson. Damon Jackson didn't look good against Ilia Topuria. He got finished very early in that fight. We know what happens in a Damon Jackson fight, though, if he doesn't get finished very early. He makes the fight very grimy, he makes it very tough, and he can normally withstand a lot of punishment as the fight goes on. It just comes down to very early if he gets caught or not, and I do think Mullarkey's cut from the exact same cloth. So with Riddell, I think people think, hey, you lost to Fiziev, while Jalin Turner maybe is on that level. It's going to be an incredible fight, though.
America home, having a good time over in the comments section. First time, long time, good to see you. Both of us in this one going with Dricus Du Plessis, though, eh?
It should be a really fun fight, and hopefully if he is able to get the win, he just gets more recognizable names like Brad Tavares. And that's the thing about beating a guy like Brad Tavares. There's never an easy out after this. It's sort of what the Tavares skill check is.
Yeah, look at poor Edmund Shabazian.
Exactly.
After he got the win. It never got easy for him, Matt. A guy who, like, I've even seen articles come out, and if it wasn't MMA fighting, I should proofread, but like Ian Garry's not even translating with Irish people. That's kind of weird. He's got a big fight coming up against Gabe Green this week, and everybody on this channel wants to pick against Ian Garry in this fight. They don't like his personality. They don't like the recycled lines. It's everything we talked about and more. Matt, I like Gabe Green in this fight for a lot of reasons that I brought up earlier on this week. But I couldn't pick him. Like, it's a weird catch-22 that I find myself in.
Gabe Green is a very valuable pick, I will say, for where the odds are and where the hype is around Ian Garry's career. But the issue is, Gabe Green does have one glaring mistake in his game.
Fucking guy gets hit a lot.
He does. When he leads for power punches, he puts his chin out first. He's someone who leads with his face, not his hands. That's a very big risk when you're fighting a guy like Ian Garry, who has shown the ability to strike off of the back foot. And I'm somebody who talks about this a lot. Like, I'm not thrilled that Ian Garry even gets the hype that he does. Because, like, I think there's other guys in the welterweight division who are as good as Ian Garry, with similar backgrounds even, who just don't really get the promotional push that he does for whatever reason. But I understand where fans are coming from. It'd be like, I think we both enjoy watching Charles Jourdain fight. You know, he's one of the more, I'd say he's one of the more famous Canadian fighters right now. Definitely
he is.
At the UFC
He's got a big
level.
fight against Shane Burgos.
And everybody likes watching Charles Jourdain fight. He has a very exciting style. Could you imagine if in every single press conference he was like, hey, I am not impressed by your performance, and he just tried to like rehash GSP lines. Like, this could sound really cheesy, but there's only one use to just be yourself, and for Ian Garry, it is weird that he's always trying to be Connor.
Adam Riley is doing the math over there. The QMK Super Chat stats, that is appreciated. Adam Riley, I assume 68.6% is good. That's pretty good if we're agreeing on these picks. So Matt, in this fight, to kind of reel it back in, you look at it, I mean, for Ian Garry, Darian Weeks, I mean, a couple of the judges had it 30-27, Garry, one had it 29-28, but he was reactive quite a bit during that fight. And then the fight against Jordan Williams, he got pieced up and then he pieced him up, and it was a first round kind of blood and guts type of performance. For Gabe Green, he had that great debut against Daniel Rodriguez, but same thing. I mean, 30-27's all the way, but Gabe Green looked pretty good in that fight. And since then, the win streak, Johan Lyness punched him to the canvas.
We just don't know how good Lyness is, though. And that is the other thing that we didn't really bring up. Like, Lyness, let's be honest, is probably on the lower end of welterweights in this division. And Gabe Green faced adversity against him. So now he's fighting one of the most hyped up prospects in this division. Again, Gabe Green's someone who can go through a really tough fight and look really good on the other side of it. Like you said with D-Rod, I think that's a great example. But the problem is, he does get hit, and against a really big welterweight who has natural knockout power, that's not really a skill I want a guy to have.
Yeah, I mean, for Gabe Green, look at him when he made his UFC debut on short notice, replacing Kevin Holland against Daniel Rodriguez. Look at the guy there, and look at the guy today, and then factor in that he had no depth perception when he was fighting earlier. He had eye surgery to correct all of that. It was more than just your LASIK. Plus, he's invested into a nutritionist. He looks amazing now. His shots are there. He can power punch. He can wrestle. He can bring everything together. So Gabe Green's a heck of a fighter. And when I have a look at this one at Fight Night Picks for the total votes, 79% going with Ian Garry. So the closeted Ian Garry fans that don't want to, let the cat out of the bag and tell everyone, because over in the chat, we're all talking about Gabe Green. We have a look at the odds for this one. Ian Garry, minus 160 when we did the video earlier this week, minus 187 now. If you look at it for Gabe Green, he is a plus 156. Ian Garry, minus 425 in his UFC debut, minus 400 against Darian Weeks, and now he's about a 2-1 favorite. So again, I brought this up at the start of the week. There's some value there, albeit Gabe Green's a way harder test than Darian Weeks and Jordan Williams.
And that's why I think he's going to offer a tough fight, but probably not get the win. And really, that's all you can look for in a fight like this. Because let's say Gabe Green is able to beat Ian Garry. He is a fighter that you can build up, and he can fight other guys and have a really fun career. Like, let's say Gabe Green beats Ian Garry, and they match him up with Santiago Ponzinibbio, maybe. Like, that'd be a really fun fight. I'm not saying he'd win that fight either. It's just like, he could have one of those action fighter type of careers if he is able to get the win off this. I just do think the UFC is trying to build Garry right now. I just don't really know where he fits in with all these other really, really great welterweight contenders right now. You have guys like, I know Shavkat and Chimaev are a little bit more up in the division right now, but I'd still say they're kind of in the same pool as these guys too. Jack Della Maddalena is a guy I brought up a lot last week. He's definitely in that Ian Garry boat. So welterweight does seem to have these sort of new guys on the come up, and it'll be very interesting to see who they can take out as they rise the division.
So both of us in this one going with Ian Garry. Esteban Zamora saying Garry, a kickboxer. Boxing is his first martial art. His second one is judo. He's a black belt in judo. He claims to have over 300 boxing fights, probably unsanctioned, but 300 boxing fights.
I just, like, okay.
Is it a spar or is it a spa?
But, like, Gennady Golovkin, for instance, has 300 amateur fights. You know how I know that? You can go back and find all of them. They've all been recorded. So I know he has 300 amateur fights. Ian Garry just said that to a person. That's my problem. He is a very good boxer. I don't say that to discredit what you're saying. It's just, I always hate it when these fighters are like, I have a background in this. Just trust me, bro.
The cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon. Old guy fights, man on the moon. This is the rematch between Mr. Donald Cerrone and Jim Miller. Matt, they both weighed in at the welterweight, I was going to say limit, but they're not really at the limit. I mean, Cowboy is 171. 170.5 for Jim Miller. Miller originally due a tricky fighter in Bobby Green for this week at lightweight. Green out. Cerrone is supposed to take on Joe Lozon 3 times, and all 3 times they fell out. So Cerrone, a couple of weeks ago at 155, he weighed in successfully. He looked awful. He didn't look so bad yesterday, so it has to be said. Now, when you go back to the first fight between these guys, and I have the number, and I want to be specific with it, 3 minutes and 30 seconds of the second round, Donald Cerrone finished Jim Miller. It was a fight at 155 pounds. Cerrone was whipping kicks to the body. They had a lot of effect on Jim Miller. He kept going down, and then he started to bring his hand down. Once he brought his hand down, Cerrone went up top. and got the TKO win over Jim Miller. So big one for Donald Cerrone. That was when he went on his big-time win streak there until he fought...
10 years ago. Perfect.
Dos Anjos. That was where we were at. But when you look at it for Cerrone's last 5 fights, 0-4 with a no contest. It was originally a draw against Nico Price, but Nico Price likes the sticky icky, and now it's a no contest.
No, it was for eye pokes. He had lost a point, and then it was a draw, and then it got turned into a no contest.
We're going to go back and double check on that one.
No, that's exactly what... It was a draw at the end of it because he lost a point for a foul. Then afterwards, it went to a no contest because he failed for weed. But the original score was a draw.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It was a draw, but it's a no contest now. But the point of it is, for Jim Miller, his last 2 fights, it's kind of wild to see this for an older guy because he finished a tricky guy in Eric Gonzalez 14 seconds into the second round, and his last time out finished Nicholas Mata at 158 of the second round. So Miller getting those second round finish wins. For Donald Cerrone, losing, and his last time out against Alex Morono didn't look very good, but it's been a long time since then. And Queen Boudica Radiant, very appreciated. Thank you for the Legends call. Go ahead, Matt.
I forget where you had left me off with the cowboy thing. I gotta be honest, Bobby Green would have boxed in Jim Miller's ears. That was a really bad fight for Jim Miller, especially at 155 pounds. And honestly, this fight at 170 is also kind of a bad fight for him. I'm sticking with the pick of Jim Miller, but I don't love the fact that it is up at welterweight. Again, that was a really big point of discussion when Cowboy was fighting Joe Lozon. It was, hey, Lozon's making him cut the extra 15 pounds, even though Lozon could easily fight at welterweight, because Joe Lozon and Jim Miller are basically the same size. Like, they fought twice. They match up basically the exact same every single time they fight. So I do think Cowboy will have a decided size advantage over Jim Miller in this fight. But I keep on going back to, well, Cowboy doesn't have a great chin at 170 anymore either. Like, the Alex Morono fight was one of those disturbing performances where a guy doesn't react the same way to taking damage anymore. There's a difference between not having a good chin and not wanting to be in fist fights. It's like Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz has a pretty good chin. He had some really big shots from Robbie Lawler. The problem is, then he got an injury from it. He broke his nose. Breaking your nose hurts really, really bad. You want to know what hurts even worse than just breaking your nose? Getting punched in a broken nose afterwards. So Nick Diaz decided, hey, I'm not knocked out, but I'm good. I don't need any more of this. Cowboy's body does not react well to damage anymore, and it might not be as cognizant of a reaction as Nick Diaz's was with Robbie Lawler, where he just sat down and basically said, I'm out. But the second Cowboy got hit by a big shot against Morono, he immediately did the Justin Gaethje defense. He brings the knee up too, almost to defend body shots. And that's the thing about Cowboy that I don't think we talked much about this week. He doesn't need body shots well at all. Never has, even at 170.
That was my point right there at the start of the week, because it is a southpaw versus orthodox matchup, which opens up the body kick. And for Cerrone, it worked for him against Miller in the first fight, but it could work the opposite way in the second fight and work in Miller's hands.
I think it's going to matter more with the boxing, though, than the kickboxing, because no matter what at kicking range, he's going to get lit up by Cowboy. At boxing range, though, you can get into more 50-50 exchanges with Cerrone. And with a 50-50 exchange, of course, Jim Miller's not in the prime of his career anymore, but I've seen him eat some big shots even lately, and he can still get through that. So I do think that Jim Miller is just... he still has a little bit more tread left on the tires, is basically what I'm trying to say. And even though this fight being at 170 does slightly favor Cowboy, I still think that Miller, like I said, has just a little bit more left in the tank.
Prince Vegeta's son, I love Bobby Green. Would have thought Miller would have beaten Bobby Green. If we have a look at Fight Night Picks, 64% of the fans have Miller in this one. I've got the over 1.5 rounds at -150. It's the first leg of the question mark kicks parlay. Their first fight went that far, and they just slugged it out for 2 rounds. So
two guys who had all-time great chins back in the day, though.
Well, we'll see how it goes. But that's what I'm going to go with, over 1.5 rounds in this one. But both of us with Jim Miller in the pick. Although, again, Cerrone has some advantages at 170 pounds that he wouldn't have had at 155. Sean, Jinu Frey got robbed. Some of us haven't forgotten. Sean, I agree with you, but...
that wasn't a robbery, though.
All right.
It was a fairly...
You were on the right side of it.
But no, I had Jinu Frey to win that fight. And I still think she lost.
I think she won. All right. Regardless, Matt, Brad Riddell's taking on Jalin Turner. And this is a fun fight because if you look at both these guys, I mean, for Turner, great physical gifts. We know that. He's long, he's strong, he's tall, he's lean, he's mean. How many different things could I throw around?
It sounds like you have a bit of a crush on him.
The guy's the tarantula. He breeds them. He keeps them. He has fun with them. That's weird. But when you look at it for Brad Riddell, obviously you know how good of a kickboxer he is. You know that scary knockout that he had against the guy who just kind of went limp and stood there in the middle of the kickboxing ring. Birdie Burt saying San Diego Burt checking in. Love Maycee Barber tonight. Hope you boys been well. I've been well, Matt. Have you been well?
I have been. Hopefully, Birdie Bert, you have a great fight day. I'm so excited for this fight card. There's sometimes, listen, even for fight night cards, I get excited because I love the sport MMA, but some of these pay-per-views just hit a little bit different in the morning. You're drinking your coffee, you're looking through Twitter, you're like, hey, Max Holloway's gonna fight later, and it just gets the day set off to a different go. So hopefully, Birdie Bert, you're having a good one, too.
Birdie Bert, have a good Independence Day on Monday. Canada Day was great yesterday. When we look at this fight, though, Matt, again, for Brad Riddell, the TKO loss his last time out where he didn't look all that great. Some people thought it was an early stoppage. I was cool with it.
But you thought he didn't look good in the fight?
No, I thought he didn't look great right at the end.
bad.
Like, Herb Dean actually made a good stoppage in that one.
I thought you were saying Brad Riddell didn't look good in that fight. That was a great fight.
No, it looked great. But when we do look at this one, Matt, you consider Jalin Turner's last time out against Mullarkey, he did look very good. And for Jalin Turner, he is on a tidy little run. And again, you look at the losses that he has in the UFC. The first one was to Vicente Luque, which you kind of chalk up to, hey, too much too soon at 170. The other loss to Matt Frivola, where Frivola went and wrestled, which is exactly what he's good at. And you look at it for Brad Riddell, he tends to wrestle in his fights, which is kind of strange considering you think, hey, kickboxer's going to kickbox. But for Brad Riddell, it's usually an aspect of it. I don't think that's going to work against Jalin Turner. It could work to his disadvantage if he does it in this fight.
He might not need it, though. This is the whole thing about this fight. I feel like you've been a little bit more pro Jalin Turner than a lot of people have, because Turner did look great against Mullarkey. Turner's wins aren't against great fighters either. He's lost to the better guys who he's fought, but he also lost to Matt Frivola, who I do not consider to be a great fighter, who doesn't have a great chin either, if we're being completely honest. I still think Jalin Turner's going to win this fight. I don't think it's going to be as easy as a lot of people think so, because this is my big point at the start of the week. Jalin Turner might be better in more areas, but the area that this fight is primarily going to be contested at is what Brad Riddell specializes in. And Riddell, yes, he got knocked out by one of the best strikers we've ever seen in the UFC his last time out. How'd he get knocked out? By a wheel kick, but let's go a little bit further into it. How'd he get knocked out by that wheel kick? Well, Fiziev had to outthink him. He had to switch stances 17 times, throw a bunch of incredibly complex combinations throughout the whole entire fight to get that thought into Brad Riddell's head, and then he was able to execute that in the dying minutes of a 15-minute absolute war between these two guys. I don't think there's a lot of other fighters in the UFC, much less this division, who can think the game to the level of Fiziev, especially in that one situation with Riddell. Again, I think Jalin Turner's going to win this fight, but there's been so many people out there who have gone, oh, well, he knocked out Mullarkey so fast, and Brad Riddell had a really hard fight with him. This fight's much more than just that.
Yeah, we look at the comment section, Matt. Adam Riley, does Riddell have Eugene cornering him? He does. Chris is saying Brad for sure wins. Circa and Maz saying Turner by sub. And again, another one in the comment section. We'll go Chad, the UFC dad. Exactly. Turner champ in 2024. I don't know about that, but he has gained in his game, and you've seen those improvements with Ruka Sport. He's been there for a long time. One of those young fighters that got in on the ground floor. If we have a look at the votes, 66% going with Jalin Turner to get the win. If we have a look at the odds, Turner was favored at the start of the week. This is the featured prelim, so to speak. So open minus 175, 149 right now for Brad Riddell, a plus 124. So listen, if you do like Brad Riddell, a good opportunity with him as an underdog this weekend.
Without it, this fight, the odds should be even on. Because again, Turner's looked good against guys who he should beat, whereas Riddell has struggled in hard fights against tougher fighters, which would make sense. So this is a very important fight, and the winner of this is definitely rankings worthy, because this is such a hard fight. There's some fights you look at, and both guys might not be ranked. I bring up Damir Ismagulov versus Guram Kutateladze. That fight wasn't that long ago. Neither one of those guys had numbers next to their name, but I think you sitting there with your friends were probably like, damn, these guys are definitely in the top 15 of the lightweights. Same thing with these two fighters. I think Riddell's, 15 or 14? He's just on the outside of the rankings. So, again, the same thing I said with Dricus du Plessis fighting Brad Tavares. If Jalin Turner beats Brad Riddell, there's no easy fights afterwards. You're only going to fight the cream of the crop at the 155-pound division, and that'll be really exciting to see just because Jalin Turner is so well-rounded.
Allegedly, Gregor Gillespie's already said no to the winner of this fight. That's a joke. Guy doesn't have a lot of fights, Matt. We move on to the pay-per-view portion of this card, and we're going to be live on the channel with the sidekick for these fights, kicking off with Pedro Munhoz, Sean O'Malley. Let us know over there in that comment section who you have in this fight, because if you do look at this one, holy smokes, for Sean O'Malley, looks like a lot of fun. The guy doesn't like to wear t-shirts under suit jackets. That's a little bit different. The guy likes to say things like, hey, nobody calls me out in this division, especially the ranked opponents, but Rob Dvalishvili wins a fight, and every time he calls out Sean O'Malley. So a little bit of earmuffs on that one. And you look at Pedro Munhoz, a guy who has the leg kicks, has the power. The big highlight that you've seen out there on the socials this week is him getting into an absolute slobber knocker against Cody Garbrandt and then knocking him out, slumping him over at the end of that one. For Munhoz, the road lately's been rocky. You can make an argument in some of the decision fights, the Frank Yeager fight, maybe the Dominic Cruz fight. But when it comes to this one, Sean O'Malley's a finisher to the nth degree. And for Pedro Munhoz, he's a walking fight of the night. So I think this is going to deliver. They obviously put this in the slot to open up the pay-per-view to entice people to get ready for it. But I think this is a great one. And it is a little hard to call.
It is, but this fight just comes down to sort of the attributes and not the skills, if you will. Speed and power really do matter. Every single champion in every division has one of those two things in like a 10 out of 10 aspect. Sean O'Malley's X factor is his speed. He makes fast fighters look slow, and it's ridiculous how good he can look on the feet when everything is flowing together. Because that's the thing about Sean O'Malley. He might not have the most one-punch knockout power, even though he definitely has one-punch knockout power. It's the accumulation factor, but also the one-punch factor. So he is a very unique fighter with his own stand-up. He uses a lot of movement, but I wouldn't say any of it's wasted. We talk about that a lot with some fighters, how, okay, you're dancing around the ring a lot, but you're not really using any of that movement to either set up a trap or really make your opponent pay. Sean O'Malley can definitely do that. That's basically what he's built his whole entire game around. It's you're going to chase me until you walk into a big shot, and when you walk into a big shot, it's probably going to end the night. And even though I love watching Pedro Munhoz fight, I thought he beat Frankie Edgar. It was a very close fight, but I did think he was able to edge that one out. I thought Dominic Cruz did enough in the last 2 rounds to really edge it out over Pedro Munhoz. But that's the big point about Munhoz. He makes slow fighters look fast. Like, speed is such a key in MMA. If you're the fast fighter, you're always going to get to the target first. I might like the leg kicks out of Pedro Munhoz. I might like the overhands out of Pedro Munhoz. I just don't know if any of those techniques can land against a guy like Sean O'Malley. And yes, that's a bit of hyperbole. Like, Sean O'Malley's going to get hit by a few shots in this fight. But he's going to be able to move out of the way of a lot of Pedro Munhoz's punches, whereas Pedro Munhoz is going to be a sitting duck to a lot of the offense of Sean O'Malley. And even if you go back and watch the Garbrandt fight that Munhoz had with him, Garbrandt's landing 3 or 4 little, like, quick strikes to every one big one Munhoz is landing. The difference is, Cody Garbrandt, his feet just get, I don't even know.
He plants.
Yeah, they get buried into the cage when he throws, whereas Sean O'Malley is very light on his feet, even when he's throwing his own power shots, and I think that's going to be the story of the fight.
When I do look at this fight, again, for Pedro Munhoz, tons and tons of power, great leg kicks, obviously we know that. But when you look at it for Sean O'Malley, I mean, this guy has UFC records that you don't often talk about. Strikes landed per minute, #1 all time at 8.37, and the best strike differential as the coughs come in at 5.01. So, again, it's crazy to see that. But you talk about a guy that has power in both hands, power in both stances, and power when he moves forwards and backwards. It's not something that you see very often. The thing that scares me, of course, is the fact that O'Malley likes to keep that lead leg out there quite a bit. And if you are a guy like Pedro Munhoz, it's there to kick. But when Munhoz kicks, they're usually long. It's not like it's kind of drawn out. And that's a perfect opportunity, 1, 2, 3 shots from Sean O'Malley and dart back out of his boxing combination. So I do love this fight. I see the comment there from VT. Sean versus Sandhagen would be an interesting fight if it did happen.
If Sandhagen can beat Song Yadong and Sean O'Malley, let's say he finishes Pedro Munhoz, that would be a perfect next booking for both guys.
And that's a pay-per-view fight, because Sean O'Malley only fights on pay-per-view. His only fight that wasn't on pay-per-view was his UFC debut. So it's kind of crazy.
That is a fight night main event if I've ever seen one, though, or like a co-main event on a pay-per-view. Like, that is a huge fight.
83% of the fans going with Sean O'Malley at Fight Night Picks. And if we have a look at the odds for this one, Pedro Munhoz, pretty big underdog, plus 255. And for Sean O'Malley, minus 318. I'm staying away from it. But again, I love the fact that this kicks off the card and we can kick off the Fight Night Picks sidekick on the channel with this fight.
It's going to be a great fight. And these are always the best fights when you have a hyped up prospect fighting maybe the more proven commodity who hasn't looked as great as of late, but they still have a lot of tread left on the tires. This should be a great matchup. But yeah, I do think O'Malley will be able to get it done.
And the question up there, Brian Platt, Sean O'Malley with glass ankles. Glass ankles. Robbie Lawler, Bryan Barberena, old guy fights. We had the rematch between Jim Miller taking on Cowboy Cerrone. This one between Robbie Lawler and Bryan Barberena. And for Bam Bam, he had a fight in the night against Matt Brown. I mean, he almost finished him at the end of one of the rounds, and the round ended. But for Barberena, an amazing fight out there against Brown. It was the hometown fight for the guy from Ohio. And it was a close one, obviously, again, by split decision. I thought Barberena had done enough to win. But when Barberena hit in that fight, it was like a Mack truck. And you look at it, his wrestling defense in his last 4 fights has been a super kryptonite. Jason Witt is a perfect example. Robbie Lawler used to put wrestling shoes on and wrestle.
In what, 2003?
Yeah, but he doesn't really do it anymore. If he needs to, he can. But for Lawler, he looked great with his boxing combinations in his last fight against Nick Diaz. And in the losses that he had on the losing streak, he was getting out-muscled, out-wrestled, and out-volumed in certain fights. But you look at it, RDA out-wrestled him. You had Neil Magny tying him.
Outstruck him, though, too.
Again, you had Neil Magny tying him up and really stifling his game, and he looked pretty lost in that fight. And Colby Covington had his number until Lawler finally let go near the end of that fight. So, again, 3-round fight in this one. I think it's going to be great. Jake Webb, these guys have never been near anything violent. Why is their opinion valid? I don't know, Jake. It's been a while.
You're watching me and I'm not watching you. So, about this fight, I do like what you said about Bryan Barberena, how he sits down on shots a lot more as of late. I do agree with that, and especially with his kicks, too. It almost seemed like he had to add his kicks in a little bit later on in his career for how nice they are, because when he goes to the body, when he goes to the head, there is a massive impact behind them. Against Robbie Lawler, though, I think he did set up perfectly. Like, could Robbie Lawler at different stages of his career beat Bryan Barberena? Probably. Like, the guy who was on his way up to the UFC title when he fought Josh Koscheck, like, that guy would have success. Oddly enough, probably the Strikeforce one wouldn't, even though he went on to become one of the all-time. Robbie Lawler's had a very strange career for anyone who hasn't followed along. He basically went from being very hyped up to not living up to the hype, to being an MMA journeyman, to coming back and being one of the best champions we've ever seen in the division. So nothing makes sense when it comes to ruthless Robbie Lawler, but I don't expect him to all of a sudden become the fighter that he used to be. Like, Draymond Green in 2016 had a really good season shooting from the three-point line. He was like 36, 37%. A lot of people after that year was like, oh my god, Clay and Steph can shoot. Now that Draymond can do it, what are we going to do? But that season was an outlier. There's stats like this in every single season. Jackie Bradley Jr. one year, I remember, for the Red Sox, batted like 350. He was amazing.
Hitting home runs.
Looked like the second coming of Vladdy Guerrero Jr. I guess the other way around, but still, he looked like he was going to be like a perennial MVP. But then, after that, it turns out that that season was a bit of an outlier, and that's what I do attribute Robbie Lawler and his performance against Nick Diaz. I think that was a bit of an outlier. That was an opponent who was near the end of his own career, who hadn't been active, who was the type of guy you can get up for every single morning when you're going to the gym. Marvin Hagler has that quote, "It's hard to get up at 5:30 in the morning when you're sleeping in silk sheets." And it is the truth. Robbie Lawler went from fighting on the prelims for no money to becoming a UFC champion, and now he's still in these really big fights. But the problem is, after you've been in these big fights for a really long time, you still need something to get motivated for. And a name like Nick Diaz can get you easily motivated to go out there and beat another legend who has a win over you. Do you think Robbie Lawler had that same enthusiasm for training when he was going to fight or preparing to fight Bryan Barberena? I certainly don't. And maybe he does come out and look really good. But for me, I expect Robbie Lawler to look more like the guy who was in the Neil Magny loss, who was in the RDA loss. And if he is that fighter, he's going to be waiting on the back foot for a lot of the punishment that Bryan Barberena is going to dish out.
I think we get Hoodie Lawler in this one. I think he just kind of waltzes around. I think he has a lot of success with his volume. And again, for Robbie Lawler, he gets up. I mean, this is on the pay-per-view main card. This is a Robbie Lawler fight. This is a Robbie Lawler spot.
Okay, but
it's not a Bryan Barberena spot.
Hear me out. Colby Covington had just got off fighting for the title, and Robbie Lawler had even said going into that fight that he wasn't that fired up for it. Like, he specifically said after the Nick Diaz fight, that is an opponent I can wake up for. That's why I always point to it. Motivation in sports means way more than anybody thinks, especially at this level. And I don't expect Robbie Lawler to be all that motivated to fight another guy who's a hard fight, who's unranked.
Jake Webb, I hope you're doing well. We meant nothing but fun teasing you. Matt, when we have a look at the odds for this one, they're at par. Robbie Lawler open plus 130, minus 110 for Bryan Barberena. Open minus 150. Minus 110 again, and if we have a look at Fight Night Picks for the total votes on this one, 51% Barberena, 49% Lawler. So a coin flip with the odds, a coin flip with the fight. I've got Robbie Lawler, you've got Barberena, but it should be a fun fight.
It should. I like Bryan Barberena like quite a bit in this matchup, though, for where the odds are. Like, here, Robbie Lawler hasn't looked good in years. Robbie Lawler hasn't looked good in years, guys. He has a win over someone else who hadn't fought in the UFC for over 5 years. I don't know how Robbie Lawler wins this fight. When was the last time he dropped anybody or landed a hard shot before that Nick Diaz fight? In none of his losses he was able to. Like, you have to go all the way back to Carlos Condit at UFC 195. That's a ridiculously long time ago. So I really do think this is Bryan Barberena's fight to lose.
All right, Matt, we're going to switch it on over to Sean Strickland, Alex Pereira. And when you look at this fight, I was surprised because the odds shifted in the last couple of days. And now Sean Strickland's a favorite. So Strickland opened -175. Then he was at +145. Then for the longest time, slight underdog, -100. And then as of Wednesday, -103. Now -124. Alex Pereira, +103. Alex Pereira doesn't speak English. Alex Pereira didn't steal the press conferences
Just
or the interviews or anything. So now he's an underdog. Because nothing else happened throughout the week. That's it. Malone Hart hitting up a big super chat. Sending appreciation from Disney and Orlando. Again, Malone Hart, like Tom Brady.
The Lakers won the title there.
Disney. Good time. But Matt, when we do look at this fight, Sean Strickland had to talk his way into being a favorite. That's kind of crazy. You don't see that very often that midweek, nothing happened, but now this guy's the favorite.
The odds were super close, though. Someone's always going to be the slight favorite if the odds are close. I don't think this is a very surprising revelation. I don't think it had a lot to do with the media.
Super Chat, why the UFC no longer has international events like it used to?
Because it cost them zero money to leave the Apex.
Yeah, and they spent all the money on the Apex, and they still make a ton of money off that, and they have a great TV deal. It sucks for you, it sucks for me, it sucks for everybody, but that's about it.
I don't really think this week in the build-up had much to do with the odds, if I'm being honest. Sean Strickland's the much more proven commodity. That's the difference between these two guys. One guy's 4-1 in MMA, and he's only fought twice in the UFC.
5-1.
5-1, sorry. And the other guy's been in multiple main events for the UFC, has had high-profile fight after high-profile fight. I understand where the odds are. I find it really hard to think that Sean Strickland's going to fight this fight like a wrestler. And I really think he's going to have to do that if he's going to win. And he can wrestle in his fights. He is not just a pure boxer by any means. Even though that has sort of been the story this week. It's Strickland has to stand with Pereira. Not at all. I think everybody who's watching this fight is expecting Sean Strickland to shoot at a certain point. I just wonder how comfortable he's going to be, or how comfortable can he be before he has to shoot that takedown. Because let's say Strickland goes in there and really uses volume well against Pereira. Gets him backed up and makes him feel his pressure as an MMA fighter. I think he can have a lot of success based off some of that pressure and putting some doubts into the head of Alex Pereira. But the flip side is, I don't think Sean Strickland's a good enough wrestler to just keep on doing that over and over again. And I think Alex Pereira's an intelligent enough fighter to figure out, okay, if you're not 100% dedicated to your takedown attempts, at some point you're going to leave an opening. You're going to be hesitant for a shot. You're going to be doing something out of character that's going to leave a window open. And if there's a window open for Alex Pereira to strike against you, he's going to put you out.
That's the trouble I have with this one. I mean, Sean Strickland is a volume, pressure type of fighter. You pressure a natural kickboxer, you're gonna get knocked out. And I mean, Sean Strickland has very good defense. He's got a tight guard. He understands. You're not the 4th ranked middleweight if you're just some chump who doesn't understand how to fight.
He does fight like an old-time sailor, though.
Now, again, he's won 2 main events in a row. Jack Hermanson, very impressive. Hermanson fought Strickland's fight in that one, and then he fought Uriah Hall, and Uriah Hall didn't fight anybody's fight. Sean Strickland dictated the entire thing. Against Pereira, 3-round fight, it's either Sean Strickland, rinse, and repeat, but he tends to wrestle later in fights, so that's going to be interesting. But if Sean Strickland has a totally different game plan than every game plan he's had at middleweight since he's gone back to 185 from the Jack Marshman fight on, then it's going to get funky, fresh, and weird. So again, the odds are now on Sean Strickland, and rightfully so. Again, 4th-ranked fighter against an unranked 34-year-old that's 6-1 in MMA, but a double champ in kickboxing, the only one to ever do it.
And here's the
simultaneously, the fans at Fight Night Picks, 53% have Sean Strickland.
And Alex Pereira is not just a double champ in kick. We're guilty for this too when we talk about fighters' backgrounds, but this guy has 7 world kickboxing champions, or this guy has X amount of jiu-jitsu titles. Alex Pereira was the Glory middleweight and light heavyweight champion.
He was the light heavyweight champ in 2021.
But this might, we're not talking about some obscure promotion that anybody can start and call their winner a world champion.
WLF4s?
You can do, Craig, people don't like to know this, but this is the truth. If Craig and I started a kickboxing organization, the two of us, we had a tournament and somebody won, we could call the winner a world champion. They're not, but we can call them that, and they can call themselves that. The difference is, Alex Pereira fought other world-class Glory kickboxers, and you can go back and watch all the fights. It's not just like he's fought people you've never heard of, and we're just saying he has this many titles and that many titles in these different areas. He is one of the best kickboxers we've ever seen make the transition to MMA.
The best part about the press conference was after Sean Strickland did his cool thing and then started his comedy bit where he took the microphone and stood up, he was like, yeah, and I want to see when Alex Pereira fights Israel Adesanya. Sean, the only way for that to happen, bud, is if Alex beats you, you nerd.
Paulo Banchero, the first overall pick for Orlando, tweeted out a picture of him with Kevin Durant for Orlando, and Richard Jefferson was like, hey, bud, if he's in an Orlando jersey, you're in a Brooklyn jersey. Not the time.
Not the time. Not the place, Matt. We'll move on to the co-main event. The poll is up here on the YouTube channel. Who takes the co-main event? 51% with Alexander Volkanovski. You guys did a great job over there, and the chat is absolutely popping. This is one of the best episodes of Question Mark Kicks we've ever had, so thank you for joining in. The likes are appreciated, so are the super chats. All right, so whether or not you thought that Holloway won the first fight, won the second fight, here we go with the third.
I don't think there's an argument for him winning the first fight, though. Like, I genuinely don't see why that first fight is so controversial. I thought Volkanovski did he did so much more than Holloway in that first fight.
I'm a Wayne Kerr saying the best is blessed. And listen, I mean, it's the 9th island, Matt. It is Vegas, and the 10th island's Toronto, but they're never going to go there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. And as Canadians, we do realize that Max Holloway is probably the most popular fighter in our country, and it's not even close.
That's not a joke either.
Oh, main evented multiple pay-per-views in Toronto, of all places. But that's the cool thing about Max Holloway. He is very promotable. Like, everybody likes Max Holloway. I've never talked to a single MMA fan who's like, you know who I hate? That Max blessed Holloway. Boy, are his fights boring, and I hate to hear what he has to say. No, nobody says that. He can get anybody interested in any fight that he's in, because he's in that weird category of you're no longer a champ, but you're still probably the second best fighter in your division. It's like the Robert Whittaker effect at middleweight. Well, Robert, you're basically better than everybody else. You've just lost to Izzy twice. The difference is those fights weren't really close, and these two have been. I just don't know what Max Holloway can do different in this fight compared to the first two. Because the perfect Max Holloway fight is, I dictate the pace with my volume, I force my opponent back. I don't ever really let them get started, just because my volume is so overwhelming that they can never really get comfortable in a fight. He tried that against Volkanovski 2 times, though, and the leg kick and the kind of wrestling threats from Volkanovski were enough to get rid of that aspect of Holloway's game. The difference is, Volkanovski hasn't shown a lot of his grappling in the first 2 fights with Holloway. Now, maybe that can be because Max Holloway is so hard to take down, and I believe that 100%. Nobody else can do it, so I don't expect Volkanovski's going to go in there and just double leg him, rinse and repeat. But that is a massive part of Volkanovski's game that he's obviously worked on and obviously has a great foundation in that we have yet to see in this Max Holloway matchup. So I think that's the one thing that we haven't seen in the first 2 fights that would really make this one very different. Let's say Volkanovski is able to get Holloway down early and it's going to force into scrambles. We're going to see how both guys' cardio hold up under a grappling heavy fight, not just a striking heavy one. And it's just a part of their games that we haven't seen yet, especially against each other. So I'll be very curious to see if either guy does go for a takedown.
Well, you've got Mr. Blue saying Max didn't earn this fight. I don't know. I mean, he had one of the best performances of all time against Calvin Kattar, and he had a great fight of the night against Yair Rodriguez where Yair showed up to fight. That was an amazing one. I'm absolutely fine with seeing a third one of these. Not necessarily like Figueiredo and Moreno 3, but this one I'm down for a little bit more than those ones. And if we have a look at the vote at Fight Night Picks over on Instagram in the story, 54% for Volkanovski, 46% for Holloway. Volkanovski is a decent favorite in this one. Open to -146, -197. Holloway +124 to +164.
I love how close the votes are on everything, though. It just speaks to how well this fight's matched up.
Yeah, and I can make an argument. I thought that Holloway won the first one. I thought Volkanovski won the second one. But most people think it's the opposite. Like, that's how crazy those first 2 fights were.
How'd you think Max won the first one?
Volume, I don't know. I thought it was a lot of fun, but regardless, when I do look at this one, for Holloway, it's pressure, it's volume. That's how he wins his fights. And he incorporated a little bit of the wrestling and the threat of the takedown against Yair Rodriguez last time out. When you look at Volkanovski, other than the wild submission attempt that would have choked out 99.9% of other featherweights against Brian Ortega, we haven't really seen him tested all that much in the UFC on the ground. So for Volkanovski, I like him still in this matchup. We've seen him gain in his game. But for Holloway, we haven't really seen any parts added in the last number of fights. So that's the reason why I have Volkanovski. I think it's an ultra-competitive matchup like the first 2 were. I can't wait for it. But again, I didn't watch this one 49 times to get ready for this.
I didn't. I don't know how there's an argument for Holloway winning that first fight, though. I really don't. The second one, I definitely thought he won. He hurt Volkanovski on multiple times throughout that fight. He hurt him with a knee and an uppercut. First fight, he got shut out with his volume striking, though. And for Volkanovski, he's already beat Max Holloway twice. I think he does, not that he has the game plan, but he does know how to shut down what makes Max Holloway special. And I really do think that's the difference between these guys. Holloway either gets his game going or doesn't get his game going. I think Volkanovski, there's some different gauges in between him being all in or not. And I think that's why I slightly edge him in this fight. But again, we're getting a rare one guy loses the first 2 fights, but we still get a trilogy. And that speaks to how good these guys are.
Seriously, change the name. I think you get more viewers. MMA Fight Night Picks. Thank me later, guys. Mark K. Gonna keep it. It's been 4 years, but appreciate it. Nonetheless, Matt, we get into our main event of the evening. Israel Adesanya taking on Jared Cannonier. I haven't really seen many Jared Cannonier picks in this one, straight up.
I haven't either. And a lot of the promotion, even today, it was like Drake on FaceTime with Israel Adesanya. Like, you're my boy. Bad. Let's go out there. Let's get it. Invest into my guys. It's cool and all that. Like, I do like the fact that Israel Adesanya does have some of that, you know, mainstream media crossover to where it's not just MMA fans who know who Israel Adesanya is. Like, people who I work with know who he is. They ask me about him all the time. They're like, oh, when's that Adesanya guy fighting? Like, there is a lot of fight fans who don't watch every single event, who definitely cancel plans on a Saturday to watch a guy like Israel Adesanya because he is that famous. He has a good personality, and there's always that extra thing than just his fighting. Like, Izzy does kind of realize that it's sports entertainment. That's a really important thing in this sport because you do get better opportunities if you are promotable, and of course Israel Adesanya is extremely promotable. The weird thing about this fight, though, is, and I'm going to tie this into some of his other fights, I don't think this is going to be like a fight of the night style fight at all. And that's the weird thing about Israel Adesanya.
Yeah, and I agree on this point too, where a lot of people are in for the excitement.
Exactly. But with Israel Adesanya, he's had one of the worst title fights of all time against Yoel Romero. That's not me hyping it up. It was just terrible.
Which was his opportunity to become a superstar, and that fizzled out.
I would say the Whitaker fight a little bit more was, and he looked good in that one. My problem is, he's just been in a few stinkers. And it's fine, but, like, Kamaru Usman, people love watching now. They didn't for the longest time, but he got the title and became way more exciting as a result. Brandon Moreno got the title and didn't hold it for very long, but even Figueiredo fits this bill too. They get the title, but they keep their same fighting style and they maintain a very exciting style. For Adesanya, it's not that he's a more reserved fighter because I do just think this is his style no matter what. Like, he had a so-so fight with Brad Tavares, and on paper you would just assume he blows the doors off Brad Tavares. It's just against Jared Cannonier, a fighter who doesn't leave a lot of openings in his striking defense, holds his hands very high, checks leg kicks, doesn't really let his opponent tee off on his body, and he doesn't get taken down very often. Like, there's just not a lot of holes in Jared Cannonier's game for Israel Adesanya to go out there and just blow the doors off him like he did against Paulo Costa. So I definitely think he's the more talented fighter at the end of the day. I just don't think he's so much better in any one area to where he's going to make Jared Cannonier look like he doesn't belong in there with him. And where the odds are, they kind of suggest that he should.
Yeah, I mean, for Cannonier, the loss to Robert Whitaker, breaks his arm in the first round. He loses to Dominic Reyes by finish in the first round at 205, loses to Blachowicz by decision. Glover Teixeira by decision, and he got knocked out by Sean Jordan, a guy who couldn't make the heavyweight limit in the PFL. Yes, that's Sean Jordan. At heavyweight in his UFC debut, I have Israel Adesanya minus 500 as the second leg of the question mark kicks parlay. I never do that with that much chalk, but I've got Adesanya minus 500 over 1.5 rounds. Jim Miller, Cowboy Cerrone minus 150. That ends up at a plus 100. I'm happy with it. But again, when I look at this one, Israel Adesanya at Fight Night Picks, 86% of the fans have him to win. He's a giant favorite, so it's going to be a fight. But for Cannonier, like, it's really got to get rolling for him to have a lot of success in a fight like this. And it could happen early. I just don't necessarily see it happening that way. Even in his last fight against Brunson, he gets dropped in the first round, and then in the second round, Derek Brunson usually has decent cardio, but he was gone in that second round, and I don't know if he punched himself out, or, credit to Cannonier, he did have success with the early lead elbow when they were clinched, and then he followed it up some more, another elbow, drops him, and then that's the end. But again, for me, I do have Adesanya here.
You just made me think of this, and I think it's a really good point that you bring up. There is a certain, like, improvisation of what Jared Cannonier does, though. Like, you hear that word and you would think, oh, Adesanya throwing spinning elbows, but Cannonier does just kind of do what comes natural. Like, he will throw elbows in weird positions. He will throw, like, a back fist after he gets a guy hurt, and that's what I do like about Cannonier. Again, he's not so different that he's like a Yair Rodriguez, where you're like, oh my goodness, I've never seen anything like this before, but he does do the traditional thing, just a little bit different, so maybe there is a certain hitch in his game that will take advantage of something Adesanya does. What I do think Cannonier can have success with is if he does do the Yoel Romero game plan. Now, as someone who's going to be doing a fight companion later on tonight, or a fight sidekick, I should call it. What time does that start at, Craig?
Starts at 9:45
Perfect.
Eastern.
So, we'll be doing that, so hopefully this main event is great. But again, if Cannonier does fight a little bit like Yoel Romero, defend a lot of those early kicks, do that swoop guard to get those body kicks out of the way, check the leg kicks, make Adesanya get frustrated, maybe it will leave an opening, trying to jump in, landing some big technique. That's the type of thing Jared Cannonier could take advantage of. I just don't think the game plan against a guy like Israel Adesanya is hope that he overextends, because he's so good technically that it's not really into his DNA.
All right, Matt. So we'll flip it on back through this card. But again, we do know the Fight Night Picks Sidekick. It starts 15 minutes before that main card. You can hang out with us during the main card. We're going to watch the fights. We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk fights. And then, of course, coming up in the not-so-distant future, Matt, I'm going to hit it. I'm going to make sure that I turn down the sound on it because, well, you can't do that when you go to studio mode. But we'll throw it on over there because, of course, we do have a big-time fight coming up next weekend. You got Dos Anjos taking on Fiziev in the main event of that one. That is, of course, next weekend. So
another one of those really fun fights, though, where you have the prospect that everyone's hyped up on against the former champion that we don't really know much about. I'm really excited for that main event.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. The comment is that here on YouTube. Yes, the Sidekick is here on YouTube. If you're subscribed, you'll know when we go live for that one. Matt, first fight on this card. Jessica Rose Clark taking on Julija Stoliarenko. I'm going to go with the finisher. Stoliarenko has never won a fight in the UFC. She's 0-4 in the UFC if you count her loss by split decision to Leah Letson on the finale of The Ultimate Fighter. But I've got Stoliarenko. I don't like Clark's top game, and she's susceptible to getting submitted, and I like that for Stoliarenko. But it's a unranked women's bantamweights. It's a coin toss.
Neither one of these fighters are great, but I do think Jessica Rose Clark is going to be the one dictating where this fight takes place at. Maybe that ends up being really bad. She jumps into the Sarlacc pit and she gets armbarred, but I don't think that's going to happen.
It's going to be something. Matt, we move on to our next one. Here we go, evil. Here we go. Jessica Eye taking on Maycee Barber. I get Maycee Barber.
So do I. But again, an interesting fight because Jessica Eye has been at the top of this division for so long. And it feels like Maycee Barber, she's been trying to break through. There was, of course, the really bad injury that she had against Roxanne. But this is another really big opportunity for Maycee Barber. And in a sport where you don't really get a lot of second or third chances, this is a really important fight for Maycee Barber. Because let's say she can't beat Jessica Eye. The UFC probably looks at her like an Elias Theodoro, to where, yeah, the extras are good, but you can't really get it done in the cage against the best fighters. How much are we really going to invest in you? So even though this fight is kind of buried on the prelims, I do think it's an important one.
Very important one for 125. You have Uriah Hall at 185 taking on Andrea Muniz. It should be a fun fight. I've got Brazil's Muniz.
So do I.
All right, the next one, we have Brad Tavares, Dricus du Plessis going with South Africa's Dricus du Plessis.
I think it should be a really fun fight, but I also have du Plessis.
K Moore is saying, went 20-5, my last two cards. This is my zone.
Nice,
K Moore doing very well. You like to see that. Ian Garry versus Gabe Green. I've got Ian Garry, but there's so many red flags, and I want to pick Gabe Green.
Like, when Jack Della Maddalena fought, who did he just fight knockout?
Ramazan Emeev.
Thank you. When he fought him, I was like, hey, Ramazan Emeev's a tough fight, but like, A, I think he's going to finish him, and luckily he did. But I also kept on saying, like, if he can beat Ramazan Emeev, he can beat anybody. And no, that's not true, but you get the idea. Like, that's a very, very talented fighter to beat that early in your career. For Ian Garry, I don't think he's in that same category of, hey, if you fought Ramazan Emeev, you could probably finish him right away and look really good after. Like, let's say he knocks out Gabe Green, maybe I'll revisit what the whole Ian Garry ceiling is. But right now I look at him as an exciting action fighter, but I don't really know where his ceiling is.
It really is tough, Matt. Our next one, Jim Miller, Cowboy Cerrone. I got Jim Miller, and I have the over 1.5 in this one. It's dicey, though, because, again, both guys have susceptibilities to getting finished. In the first fight, Jim Miller got finished later in the second round, but I think it's going to be a fun one at 170. I'm eager for this one.
It should be a fun fight. I have Jim Miller, even though I hate the weight class that this fight's being competed at, just because at 170, it does offer a lot of positives to Cowboy Cerrone, because he doesn't look good at 155 at all for a long time, whereas at 170, and people in the chat, we've both brought it up, like, you can even look at it on the scales. How bad did he look at 155? He looked terrible.
So bad.
He looked like he hadn't had water in like 3 weeks. But yesterday at weigh-ins, kind of looked like Cowboy Cerrone. Like, yeah, he cut a few pounds, but it definitely wasn't as drastic of a weight cut. So I do think he has a better chance to win because it's at 170, but I'm still picking Jim Miller.
Matt, the next one, Brad Riddell, Jalin Turner. I'm going with the Tarantula to get the win.
I have Jalin Turner, but this has Fight of the Night written all over it. Like, if this is a tough 29-28 either way, I would not be surprised.
Fight of the Night's abound. Pedro Munoz, Sean O'Malley. Another great one going with Sean O'Malley.
If Sean O'Malley eats even one calf kick and wins this fight, I'm sick and tired of hearing people being like, hey, kick him in the leg one time, we'll go down. Like, if you beat Pedro Munhoz, we can never question your ability to defend leg kicks ever again. So hopefully for Sean O'Malley's sake, that'll just won't be a conversation after this fight.
Next one, we have Lawler Barberena. I'm going with the former champ, Robbie Lawler. Elite XC zone.
I think Barbarena finishes them, to be completely honest with you.
Throwing it out there. Sean Strickland, Alex Pereira. Going to the Alex Pereira. It's wild for me because normally in fights I go with the Sean Stricklands. You know what I mean? Like a guy who's more proven, who has more tools. But I like the power of Pereira. And in a striking match, which is 99.9% of Strickland's fights, I mean, you know, he's there at range. Pereira's got a big advantage there.
I agree 100%. And if Pereira can start kicking too before Sean Strickland even gets into range, I think it'll be a massive, massive part of his game.
Stephen Hunt has Sean all day, boys. Third round, let's get paid. He's got a great opportunity with his wrestling for sure. I'll give you that, Stephen Hunt. Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway. 3, will it be thrice the wins for Volkanovski? I think so, but another great fight.
If Holloway wins, we need like 4 and 5. Not a lot of times I'm ever going to be clamoring for that. Juan Manuel Marquez and Manny Pacquiao fought 4 times. It's really the only other time I can think of 2 guys fighting 4 times. But if Holloway wins, and the fact that all 3 of their fights have been for the belt, I think this is the one time Dana White would say, yeah, we could throw a number 4 up on that poster. But I still have Volkanovski.
And in the main event, Stylebender versus Cannonier. Going with Israel Adesanya. Another... Like, at least it's a new challenger, right?
And that's what I do like. Like, I would rather see this than, like, Marvin Vettori versus Adesanya 3. And even though I think Marvin Vettori is a very talented fighter, like, I like watching Marvin Vettori, it's just some styles don't really get you all that excited. For Jared Cannonier, a power puncher with good striking defense, like, you can start to tell a story about how he has success against a guy like Adesanya. I just think the movement of Izzy, along with his kicking game, and just his ability to throw in combinations, can be a little bit too much for Jared Cannonier.
So, the housekeeping. There is the Fight Night Picks sidekick. It's going to start 15 minutes before the main card here on the channel. If you go into the playlist that this is in, it's right below it. So you can click on there, subscribe, get ready for that hangout. We're going to watch the fights. We're going to talk about the fights. There's going to be a lag, but you just turn the commentary off on your channel and join in with us. It'll be a lot of fun. And again, we also have a couple of different things. Early stoppage dropped yesterday, so you have time before the fights. You go watch that. It's a little bit shorter than usual, but we talked about Israel Adesanya quite a bit, the Miller-Cerrone fight, the state of MMA. Is it in an ebb or a flow? There's a lot of content out there. But Matt, it should be a big-time weekend. And of course, next weekend, RDA versus Fiziev, the return of Ultimate Fighter winner Ricky Tercios taking on Eamon Zahabi. There's some good fights on that card. There's some fights on that card, like Jared Van Dare and Chase Sherman, both 1-4 in their last 5. But regardless, a lot of MMA right now, and I'm really excited for it.
Should be a great pay-per-view card. I've been excited all day for this thing to start later on tonight. Hopefully you guys are as fired up as I am for this fight card, because trust me, I've not been in a mood like this for a night of fights in a very long time. It's going to be a great time, and I cannot wait to watch this main card along with all of you guys.
Should be a great card, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.